Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we've got something really exciting to talk about, the brand new Blueprints update, version 2.001. This one's a big deal, not because it completely changes how the game plays, but because it quietly fixes a ton of things that have been frustrating players for weeks. You know those updates that don't scream massive overhaul in the patch notes, but end up making the game feel smoother, more stable, and just better all around? Yeah, this is one of those. Now, if you've been spending time exploring every mysterious corner of Blueprints, you'll know the game has had its share of odd bugs and moments where things didn't quite make sense. Some of those were harmless little quirks, and others were the kind that made you just stare at your screen thinking, wait, what just happened to my progress? Thankfully, this update finally tackles a bunch of those. But before we get into that, let's clear up one thing that confused a lot of people: the version numbers. On consoles, it's labeled as 2.01, while on PC, it matches up with what players already got a little earlier as patch 1.6. So don't worry, you're not missing content, and it's not two separate updates. It's the same thing, just named differently, depending on the platform. One of the biggest and honestly most comforting additions in this patch is the new Restore from Backup option. This one might not sound flashy, but anyone who's ever had a corrupted save file or one of those weird cloud sync conflicts knows exactly why it's such a game changer. Before this patch, if something went wrong with your save, you were just, well, stuck. You either lost hours of progress or had to start over entirely. Now, you can restore a previous version of your save directly from the in-game menu. It's a small thing in theory, but it's the kind of feature that shows the developers are really listening to the community. Because nothing ruins a game faster than losing your progress to some invisible glitch. Speaking of glitches, this update squashes a ton of them. Remember that issue with the special key in the vestibule area that would sometimes cause the game to soft lock? Yeah, that's gone. No more being trapped in a loop or stuck with a door that refuses to open even though you did everything right. The controller issue in the conservatory got fixed too, which is a relief for those of us who prefer playing on a gamepad. Before, if you tried to reset rarity in that room, the controls just wouldn't respond probably. Like it was incredibly annoying. And that's now smooth as butter. Um, Another fix that's worth talking about is the one involving the dig spots. Some players might not even have realized this was broken because it wasn't super obvious. Basically, there was supposed to be a rare hint scrap that could show up when digging, but due to how the spawn logic worked, it just didn't. The odds were so low that it was essentially impossible to find. The devs fixed that, so now the item actually has a fair chance of appearing. What's nice is they didn't overcorrect it. The item still feels rare, just not broken. That means the thrill of finding it is still there without being frustratingly impossible. They also cleaned up a bunch of stuff in the drafting system. Some players noticed that an extra classroom would sometimes appear when it wasn't supposed to, or certain rooms just couldn't be drafted properly in specific corners or edges of the layout. That's been resolved. And while it's a small detail, the greenhouse room had this bizarre tendency to disappear from the draft pool entirely in some cases. That's also been fixed. It's one of those subtle things that most people wouldn't catch until they realized something felt off, but it's fixed now and it makes the building flow of the game feel more consistent. Then there's the Chamber of Mirrors, which had a really frustrating bug where the reward could sometimes come up blank. That's been sorted out, so you actually get what you earned now. Along the same lines, the parlor boxes had an issue where all three would sometimes turn up blank too, and the devs added an extra safeguard, so that can't happen anymore. These little polish fixes might not sound dramatic when you read them, but when you're actually playing, it makes the whole experience feel more reliable. You're no longer second guessing whether the game is glitching out on you when something seems off. One that made me laugh a little, the metal detector bug. You'd pick up a certain key, but the detector would keep going off like it had a mind of its own, even though you'd already found the item. That endless beeping was both hilarious and kind of maddening. The patch finally silences it when it's supposed to, so that little ghost beep won't haunt you anymore. Now, outside of those technical fixes, there are also a bunch of minor quality of life improvements sprinkled throughout. For example, they went through and fixed some issues with commissary orders and signs that weren't displaying properly. A couple of typos were cleaned up, which might sound small, but it's the kind of polish that makes everything feel more refined. They also tweaked the wording in one of the final exam sections to make it clearer what you're supposed to do, which I know will help people who got tripped up by vague descriptions before. And for those who love the more puzzle-heavy side of the game, there's a fix for one of the math grids that had a tiny but significant error. That's the kind of detail you might only notice if you're really into solving every last riddle perfectly, but it's still cool to see they went in and corrected it. Another interesting fix was for a regional character issue that could actually break the Foundation repellent feature. Basically, depending on your system's region or language settings, some of the special characters used in text would cause that mechanic to malfunction. Now that's patched up, so it should work no matter where you're playing from. And they even added a new audio cue tied to that, which gives it a little extra feedback, um, something the game honestly needed in a few places. What's also worth noting is that earlier this month, the PC version got a smaller follow-up patch, labeled 1.6.1, that wasn't really about game gameplay, but was more of a behind-the-scenes security update. It addressed a Unity runtime vulnerability, making sure the game stays safe and stable. That update hasn't been mentioned in the console patch notes, but there's a good chance the fix is already baked into this build anyway. Either way, it's not something you'll notice while playing, but it's good to know the devs are staying on top of the technical side too. Something else that's been confirmed is that the developers are now shifting focus toward the next major patch, which they've said will be the final big content update, version 1.10. That one's supposed to wrap up the story and bring in a few last additions before they move on from Blueprints entirely. No release date yet, but based on how these updates have been rolling out, it probably won't be too far off. It's kind of bittersweet knowing this world is nearing its final chapter, but at the same time, it's impressive how far the game has come since launch. If you've been following it from the beginning, you'll remember that Blueprints started with a lot of promise, but also a fair share of rough edges. Over time, each update has been like a steady hand smoothing those edges, making the whole experience more cohesive. And this patch, version 2.001, feels like the moment where the game finally stands on solid ground. You can tell the team has been listening carefully to community feedback, fixing things not just because they were broken, but because players were asking for them to be better. And honestly, that's what I love seeing in a game like this. It's not about flashy new content every time. It's about taking what's already there and making sure it works exactly how it should. The addition of the backup restore option is such a great example of that philosophy. It's the developers saying, we know what's been frustrating you and we've got you covered now. It's thoughtful design, and that kind of care builds trust with players. Now, for those wondering whether to jump back in after a break, this is absolutely the right moment. The stability improvements alone make a huge difference. You can go back in without worrying about save corruption, room bugs, or odd controller issues. Everything feels smoother, and the little annoyances that used to break immersion are finally gone. The world of Blueprints has always had this eerie charm to it, and with this update, that atmosphere really shines without the distractions of technical hiccups. It's also worth mentioning that even though this isn't a content-heavy update, it still manages to change how you feel about playing. Sometimes fixing a few long-standing problems can make the entire game feel fresh again, and that's what's happening here. It's like when you return to a favorite place after it's been cleaned up and restored. Um, the magic is still there, but it feels more complete. So, in short, this update isn't about adding flashy new rooms or changing the core gameplay. It's about trust. It's about stability. It's about making sure the foundation of Blueprints is rock solid before the developers wrap things up with their final update. It's the kind of patch that reminds you why this game has built such a loyal following, not just because it's mysterious and clever, but because it's made by a team that genuinely cares about getting it right. That's pretty much the full picture of what's going on with Blueprints right now.